Well, it's great to have each of you here today across all 6 of our campuses, especially on such a cold, wintry day. And it's especially good to have those of you joining us from Emmanuel Bible Chapel in Berwick, Pennsylvania. It's great to have you joining us for this Simplify series. And just to kind of tell all of us a little bit more about Emmanuel Bible Chapel, EBC is a church in Berwick of about 1,000 to 1,200 people. And probably about 2 to 3 years ago, some of the leadership from EBC approached LCBC and just asked the question, would we ever consider talking about the possibility of EBC joining the LCBC family? And so over the last 8 to 10 months, the leadership of both EBC and LCBC have been in some pretty serious dialogue, just kind of talking about what would that look like for EBC to be a part of LCBC. And actually in December, the Board of Elders of both LCBC and EBC voted unanimously to recommend to the church families that, let's consider this, let's do this, let's have EBC join LCBC and the LCBC family. And so over the next several weeks, those that are part of LCBC will get to hear more about EBC and find out a little bit more about what does that look like, what does that mean for LCBC. For those that are part of Emmanuel Bible Chapel, you're going to hear a lot more over the next several weeks about LCBC. And it's not a done deal, still a lot of questions to ask, a lot of conversations to be had. But the hope is that at the end of February, then we'll have opportunity to kind of affirm the leaders from both EBC and LCBC and affirm to say, this is something that we feel like God is leading us towards, and EBC becomes officially a part of LCBC. So good to have those of you from Emmanuel Bible Chapel with us. Well, when I was in high school, one of the predominant things that I thought about and was involved with in high school were cars, and specifically fast cars. At least we thought they were fast cars. And so the friends that I ran around with, one had a Firebird, a couple had Camaros, one had a Z28, I had a 67 GTO. No Mustangs, no Fords in our little group. And the big thing for us were just cars. And I remember when I first went and test drove that GTO and opened up, as I'm looking through the car, opened up the glove box, and it was a 67. I grew up in the early 70s, and so kind of right at the height of the muscle car era. And so opened up the glove box, and this would have been 1972, and there was actually a sticker for the original sale price of that 67 GTO, $2,700 is what the original price was for that car. And I was going to be buying it, or at least hoping to buy it, for $995. And that was a huge amount for me. And I'd been saving up for months and months and probably years to buy that car. So I go to test drive the car, 16 years old. My dad is with me. And so it's me driving the car, my dad in the bucket seat in the passenger seat, my friend Doug in the back seat. But Doug was so excited that he's almost in the front seat. He might as well have sat on the console between us as we're test driving this car. And the whole time that we're driving it, he keeps getting more and more excited. And all he keeps saying over and over is, this car is so fast, this car is so fast, it's so powerful. And it's cool to hear, but not when your dad is sitting next to you and he's going to decide whether you get to buy this car or not. And so I'm just thinking, I don't need my fool friend in the back seat messing this whole thing up. And so for whatever reason, my dad went ahead and allowed me to buy that car. It ended up being a great car for me and a lot of great memories and experiences in that car. Best we could tell, highway miles, about 7 miles to the gallon, that car got. Friday and Saturday nights, about 3 miles to the gallon is about what it ran. Now, this isn't a GTO. This is a Mazda Miata, and much newer car than my 67 GTO. Cool little car. I mean, it doesn't measure up to the 67 GTO, but not many cars did, especially not Mustangs. But anyway, cool car. And it's a nice car. It's a clean car. It runs well. I mean, cars now are so different. They're engineered. They almost drive themselves. They almost park themselves. And so cars today are very different than my 67 GTO. My guess is it probably gets better gas mileage than the GTO. I'm just guessing, assuming that would be the case. Speaking of gas, we were actually in North Carolina between Christmas and New Year's for a family wedding. Do you know what the rest of the country is paying for their gas? Less than $2. I mean, $1.90 something. That was 3 weeks ago. And so I don't know what's up with that and what we're paying for in Pennsylvania, but it's very different. But that's a whole other issue. So anyway, nice car. And my guess is it runs well, but there's one problem with this car. And I don't know if you've noticed it or not yet, if you can even see it, but the problem with this car, as nice and as clean as it is, and I don't know about you, but when my car is clean, it runs so much better. I mean, everything seems so much better when it's clean. This one's clean, it's nice, it runs well. The problem is, it's got a flat tire. front left tire is flat. And when you've got a flat tire, it affects everything else in the car. So it doesn't matter how clean it is. It doesn't matter the gas mileage you get. It doesn't matter how well engineered it is. It's not going to run well because it's got a flat tire. And I could take this car and I could take it to a mechanic and I could say, you know what, there's something that's not right about this car. It's just not running the way it should. And I think because of the engineering, I think because of everything else, it ought to run well, but it's not running well. Can you just tell me what's wrong with my car? And it's not mine, but this car. And so I think the mechanic would look it over. I'm sure he'd open up the hood, he'd look all around, and bottom line, he'd come back and say, you know, David, problem is you've got a flat tire right here. Everything else looks fine. You've got a flat tire. And I could listen to the mechanic, and I could step back and I could go, you know, I don't think that's it. I don't think it's a flat tire. I mean, I think there's something else wrong with it. As a matter of fact, I think what it is, it's the color of the paint. I mean, this is Battleship Gray, and I like Battleship Gray, but several years back, I tried to buy my mother-in-law a car that was Battleship Gray. She said, I don't want a car that's Battleship Gray. And so maybe it's the color of the car. And so candy apple red, I mean, that seems to be a faster kind of color than Battleship Gray. And so I think what I'd like to do is paint this car candy apple red. And the mechanic says, you can paint the car whatever color you want. But it's not going to run well until you fix the flat tire. You've got to fix the flat tire. And I go, you know, I don't think that's it. And so, you know, maybe I think what I'll do, I think I'll just put a new sound system in it. I mean, if I do that, that'll take care of everything. I mean, XM radio, I could listen to the Cowboys, I could do anything. If I have a good sound system in it, I could crank it up. I wouldn't have to hear the thumping coming from the front end of the car, and there'd be thumping, but it'd be in my chest and the bass, and I think what I need is a new sound system for this car. And the mechanic would say, you know what? You can do whatever you want to this car, but until you fix the flat, it's not going to run well. It affects everything else with this car. Now, you and I are like cars. And some of us are shiny and sparkly and clean, kind of Mazda Miatas. Others are more muscle cars or GTOs. Others may be pickup trucks. Some of you may be family sedans. Some may be vans. All different types of cars. And what's interesting is in our lives, in our cars, some run well, some not so well, and we have problems. We try to figure out what the problem is, and so we check under the hood, and we think, you know, if I just change some things in my family, maybe I change my family, I change my partner, I change my job, and we try to change all these different things. What's interesting is while we're doing all this changing, what really may be the case for a lot of us is we're just running on a flat tire. And what's interesting, even in life, is if we've got a flat tire in our lives, it is not going to go well. Everything else is impacted by that flat tire. And so we're in this series that we're calling Simplicity. And in the series, as we talk about simplicity, we're talking about the fact that as we go through life, it doesn't always go well. Some of us are running on what seems like more than one flat tire. And we're trying to figure out how do we kind of rectify that? How do we fix that? And what's interesting is God has a lot to say about life and how to do it well. And he has a lot to say specifically about, you know, sometimes we're fixing the wrong things. We're changing the paint, we're changing the stereo system, when really what we've got is a flat tire. If we can focus on the flat tires, all of life goes better. And so what's your flat tire? I mean, maybe for you, your flat tire is relationships, and you've got these relationships that are messing you up and driving you crazy, and until you fix the whole relational thing, the rest of the car isn't gonna run so well. Or maybe for some, it's as we talked last week, maybe for you, you're overwhelmed and exhausted with life, and you're trying to figure out, how do I do life and do it well? And yet you're just overwhelmed, and so God steps in, and he says, you know what? Here's the problem. It's the way you're dealing with your time, and it's not a matter of just being a better time manager. He says something totally counterintuitive. He says, you know what? You just need to pull aside, spend some time with Jesus. Just spend some time talking with Jesus. Everything else will fall into place. And if you weren't with us last weekend, go back on the website, lcbcchurch.com, and you can kind of pick up from where we were last weekend. Or maybe for you, your flat tire is your finances. I mean, that's what we all struggle with, we deal with, we talk with, we work for it. We wrestle in our families and our marriages together as finances. And maybe for you, the flat tire is your finances. And you're trying to change everything else in your life and everything else about the car. And God just says, you know what, if you could just get this one thing straight, everything else will begin to fall into order. And God has something to say about our finances. So let me just tell you right up front what God says and his view on this whole thing of fixing the flat tire, maybe that involves our finances. And God says, bottom line, if we make him number one, in our lives, he says everything else will fall into order. God says if you will make me first, everything else will start coming into order. Everything else kind of starts aligning after that, and you can change everything else in your life, and you can try to rearrange, change the paint, change the sound system, whatever you want to do. But God says until you make me first, then you know what? It's going to make everything else out of whack. Now what's interesting is we all like being first. And God himself says he wants to be first. He wants to be first in your life. He wants to be first in my life. And so much so that God describes himself as a jealous God. Anything else that gets in his way in our lives, he's jealous of that. So much so he says it this way in Exodus 34. He says, you must worship no other gods, for the Lord, whose very name is jealous, is a God who is jealous about his relationships with you. He just said, I just want to be number one in your life. In essence, what he's saying is he's very sensitive about receiving the honor and respect that he's due. He says, here I am. I'm the creator of the universe. I'm the one that holds the universe together. I'm the one that's brought salvation to the world. And so just give me the respect, just give me the honor that I'm due. And so when it comes to you, when it comes to me, God says, look, I just want to be first in your life. And what that means is to be first in your life. He says, I just want to be the first one when you are going through a hard time. He says, I want to be the first one you turn to. When you are going through a troubled kind of period of your life, I just want to be the first one that you turn to. Or when something is going exceptionally well in your life, I just want you to be I want to be the first one that you turn to and just say, hey, can you believe what's going on in my life? And so God just says, I just want to be number one. But what's interesting is he goes a step further than just talking about that. He says, I want to be number one in your life, but he takes it a step further. He says, I don't want you just to talk about it. I don't want you just to kind of show up at church on the weekend and sing about the fact that God, you're number one. You're the first, you're the last, you're the king forever. Great that you're talking about it, God says, but I want more than that. I don't want it just to be language. I don't want it just to be lip service. I don't want you just to tell other people that, yeah, God is number one in my life. God actually, demonstrating the fact that he's number one is important to God. It's almost like he's saying, show me. Show me that I'm really number one. I tend to be skeptical about a lot of things, and so I'm constantly telling people, just show me that that's really true. So much so that Andy Martin, one of the guys on our staff, constantly tells me, David, you should have been born in Missouri, not in Texas. And I don't know if you know Missouri, their state motto, but it's the show me state. And Andy says, you should have been born in Missouri because you're constantly saying, show me. And it's almost like God is doing that, where he's saying, it's great that you talk about me being number one. I want you to show me. Demonstrate it for me. And he actually tells us specifically how he wants us to demonstrate that he's number one in our lives. And he hits an area that is near and dear to all of us. He hits an area that we deal with all the time in our lives and we struggle with all the time in our lives. And he says, show me with your money. Show me with your money. And he says, if you'll do that, then he says, everything else will begin to fall into order. There's actually a word that God uses. And what's interesting is God gets very specific about this. So there's some things that God tells us, this is what I want you to do, this is how I want you to live. And he's very general about it, and so there's lots of flexibility. But when it comes to this, God is very specific. He gets very detailed about how he wants us to demonstrate that he's number one in our lives. And so he does it with a word that he uses. It's a word called tithing. And tithing is just giving back to God, bringing back to God what's already his. Specifically, it's bringing or returning 10% of what we have, our wealth, our income, back to God. And step further, though, God doesn't just say, demonstrate I'm number one by bringing me 10%. God actually takes it another step further. He says, demonstrate to me that I'm number one in your life by bringing me 10% of your wealth. But he says, I want you to bring the first 10%. Not just any, but the first 10%. Exodus chapter 13. God says, dedicate to me every firstborn among the Israelites. The first offspring to be born of both humans and animals belong to me. Bring me the first, he says. So let's say when it comes to animals, he says, I just want you to bring me the very first animal that you have. Don't wait until you have 10 and then go, okay, now I'll bring you one of the 10 or the 10th one. He says, before you even have a second one, bring me the first one. Is really what he's saying. And so it's not if you have 10 sheep, bring me one of those sheep. It's not bring me the one that keeps eating your flower beds because you're going to kill it anyway. He's just saying, you know what? Bring me the very first one. He wants to be first in our lives. And so for us, what that means is when we bring whatever we're bringing to God, we don't wait and say, you know what, I'm going to pay all the bills and hope there's something left over. We don't say, you know what, I'm going to kind of take care of everything else, and then God will just see if there's anything remaining. God says, I just want the first. And another passage, Exodus 23, as you harvest your crops, God says, bring the very best of your first harvest to the house of the Lord your God. Bring the very best of the first, he says. Bring it, he says. And what's interesting when he says bring it, he doesn't talk about giving it because we're not giving God anything. It's already his anyway. And one of the mistakes that we oftentimes make is we think everything is ours. And so if I'm going to give something to God, I've got to give something of mine to him. And he says, no, it's all mine anyway. And you happen to be using it right now, but if you die this afternoon, somebody else will be using it tomorrow. And so he says, it's all his. And so he says, I just want you to bring me the first of what you have. And he tells us where to bring it. He says, bring it to the house of the Lord, which again, he gets real specific. And so we don't bring a tithe to a Christian school. We don't bring a tithe to a university or a hospital or our favorite charity. We don't bring a tithe to our niece who happens to be a missionary in Malawi. Instead, he says, and we can give above and beyond the tithe, those kind of causes. But he says, just bring it to the house of the Lord. And oftentimes this is called the principle of first. And it's all throughout the Bible. And here's what I know. I think most of us who are here today would say, God should be first. I mean, he should be first in my life. But when it comes to our money, when it comes to our finances, I think if we were honest, a lot of us would have to say, you know what, he's not really all that close to the number one spot. Because really, if we're honest with ourselves, what happens with our money, some of us, he's not even on the list. And some of us, it's like, okay, I've got to pay the mortgage, and I've got to take care of my car payments, and I've got to take care of school loans, and I've got to take care of the cell phone bill, and I've got to take care of, and then if there's anything left over, then God, we'll see what we can do for you. And in essence, what we're doing is we're running on a flat tire, and God says, as long as you're running on a flat tire, everything else is out of whack. It's not going to work well for you. And so God says, take care of the flat tire. And again, this is a big deal to God because he gets very, very specific on how to do this. So let me ask you to open up a Bible. Malachi chapter 3, it's page 729. Page 729 in the Bibles there at your seats, and there should be Bibles there on all of our campuses around your seats somewhere. Page 729, Malachi chapter 3, and in this particular passage, God is talking to people that are his followers. He's talking to the people of Israel, his followers, and he's kind of griping at them, and he's saying, you know what, you claim to be my followers, but you're not really demonstrating that you're my followers. And so Malachi chapter 3, let me begin reading verse 6, page 729. God says to these people, he says, I'm the Lord, and I do not change. That's why you descendants of Jacob are not already destroyed. Let me just stop there because he's making a powerful statement here. He's kind of saying the only reason you're not dead and I haven't destroyed you is because you happen to be descendants of Jacob. And it's almost like he's saying the only reason why you've been running on a flat tire and I haven't allowed you to just totally destroy yourself is because you happen to be a follower of Jesus in our day, we might say. And so he's saying, I'm allowing you to continue. But verse 7, ever since the days of your ancestors, you scorned my decrees, failed to obey them. Now, return to me, and I'll return to you, says the Lord of heaven's armies, if you'll just start following me, he says. But you ask, how can we return when we've never gone away? The people ask. God says, should people cheat God? Yet you've cheated me. The people say, but you ask, what do you mean? When did we ever cheat you? And God says, you have cheated me of the tithes and offerings due to me. You're under a curse, for the whole nation has been cheating me. And so again, just flat tire. You've been kind of running on a flat tire, ignoring the tire, thinking it's everything else. God says, it's not going to work. It's not working well. It's not going to work well for you. And so if I just stop there, first thing God says, tithing really is just returning to God what already belongs to him. It's all his anyway. It's not really ours. It's all his anyway. It's returning what already belongs to him. And so we go on, verse 10. This is where God gets real specific, but he also gets very encouraging. Verse 10, he says, bring all the tithes into the storehouse so there will be enough food in my temple. Now, most conservative scholars would say the storehouse is just kind of the New Testament church. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse so that there will be enough food in my temple. If you do this, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I'll open the windows of heaven for you. I'll pour out a blessing so great you won't have enough room to take it in. And then he throws out this challenge. Try it. Put me to the test. Your crops will be abundant, for I'll guard them from insects and disease. Your grapes will not fall from the vine before they are ripe, says the Lord of heaven's armies. And he's just saying, look, tithing is returning what's already mine. Tithing is returning the first 10% of what I've already given to you. He's just returning it back to me. But then he takes it a step further. He says tithing is returning that first 10% so that God can bless the rest. He says, just do this, and I will take care of the rest. Now, let me kind of show you, explain to you how this actually works. Bottom line, let's say that you have a business, and let's say you're a landscaper, and I have need for a landscaper, and so I call you. And I say, I've got some landscaping work that I need done around my house. Can you come and let me show you what I need done, and we'll figure out a price and decide if we're gonna do this. So you show up, and I kind of show you around the house. And I say, I need some flower beds here that I need put in. I'd like this tree there, another tree there. And so we kind of go through the whole deal. We figure out what color of mulch we want once everything is done. And so we work through it. You leave, you figure out a bid, what it's gonna cost. You send that to me, and I decide, okay, this is the job that you're gonna do for me. So you come. And you do the job and you do it well. And you send me the bill at the end of the job, and I send you a check and pay for it. You put that check in the bank, and then from that check, you pay for the trees, and you pay for the mulch, and you pay for the labor that helped you do the work around my house. And when you're finished with all of that, you realize that you've got $1,000 left over. That's what you earn. That was your income. That's what you earned from doing that job. And so you go to the bank, and you say, I would like to get $1,000 in cash from the work that I did. And so they give you 10 $100 bills, crisp, clean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 crisp $100 bills, because you've earned that. That was your income, that was your earnings. Now, two questions about this. When God talks about tithing, remember, tithe is a tenth of what you have. Then God says, okay, just bring me a tenth. And so how much of this is a tithe? It's $100, real obvious, right? So it's $100. Now, the second question is a little bit more interesting. Again, there's 10 of these. Which one of these is actually the tithe? Which one would actually be the tithe out of these 10? It's the first one. The very first one that leaves my hands. When I'm holding these, God says, if you make me number one in your life, the very first one that leaves your hands, bring it to me. That's what he actually says. And he says, just bring it to me. That's the very first one. And yet what's interesting, what we tend to do is we kind of say, okay, well, wow, $1,000, so I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 of these, 5 of these aside for the mortgage, and a couple of these for the car payment, and 2, if not 3 of these for the cell phones, and then we've got groceries, and then we go, ooh, okay, God, yeah, okay, I'm going to bring you something, but right now, you're number one, God, you're number one. You know, you're important to me. You're the King of Kings, the first and the last. You're number one, God, but right now, and I think what God says is, you know what you did? You just gave the tithe, you just gave it to the mortgage company. And he says, what's interesting is the mortgage company, they can't bless you. They can't do anything else for you. But he said, I can, but you just gave it to them. And so we take it and we say, okay, here's the money for the rent, and here's the money for the school loans, and here's the money for the cell phones, and here's the money for the groceries, and there's nothing else there. And God says, you know what you're doing? You've got a flat tire here. Until you get this right, nothing else is going to run well. So God actually says this, Proverbs chapter 3. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything that you produce. Then he will fill your barns with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. He says, you just demonstrate to me, just show me, demonstrate to me that I'm number one, then I'll take care of you. Now let me just tell you kind of the way Ruth and I do this, the way it works for our family. See, I get paid online, and so every 2 weeks, magically, money shows up in our bank account, and Ruth and I have already decided what we're bringing to God, and in the tithe, and then some, and so we set it up even that online. So that happens automatically, and so whenever money comes into the account, then it instantly goes out as well. And so when I sit down to pay bills, the very first thing I do on the check register is just put down, okay, this is where it went first. It went to God first, and it happens automatically. And in essence, what we do every time that happens is we're saying in our lives, in our family, God is first. God, you're number one in our family. Interestingly, over 50% of LCBC now gives online that way on a regular basis. And Ruth and I have been putting God first that way since we first were married 36 years ago. And I mean, writing that first check out of the account to God. And we do it, again, because it answers the question, who's number one? God, you're number one in our lives. So let me just say to you, maybe you're finishing up school and you've got school loans and you're not sure what's gonna happen job-wise. Now is the time to start this. Or maybe you're just starting your family. You say, as soon as we're married, as soon as we begin to have kids, when we get things figured out, we'll go ahead and start this. Now is the time to start this. Or maybe you say, you know what, we're looking to buy a house. We're trying to figure out retirement. God says, now is the time to start. Doesn't matter if your parents practice this or not. I mean, God says, look, if you will do this, if you'll do this, everything else will run well. If not, you're running on a flat tire. And if not, you're gonna be stressed about your finances and stressed about your money. God says, I will take care of you. See, every paycheck that I'm making a statement, as I do this with God, I'm making a statement saying, God, you're number one. I'm trusting you with my life. Now, always a lot of questions just about the details of how this works. And so rather than me trying to answer all the questions, there's questions like, well, do I start before, after taxes? You know, do I pay down my debt first? Can I give to universities or hospitals? Or what about, can I work my way up to the 10%? And so Malachi chapter 3, verse 10 just spells it out real easily, real clearly. And so you can answer your own questions based on what it says. Verse 10, bring all the tithes into the storehouse. So it says bring all of it, all 10%, the whole thing, just bring it, 10%. Into the storehouse, which again, conservative theologians would say, that's just kind of the New Testament church. Bring it to the storehouse so that God can accomplish his work, so that he can do his thing. And then he says, if you do that, I'll take care of you. Now make sure as you see this, that God is saying, I'll take care of you. He's not saying I'll make you a millionaire. He's not saying I'll make sure that you've got money for a boat and an airplane and everything else. He just said, I'll take care of you so you don't have to worry about money anymore. It's not going to be an issue of money in your life. I'll just take care of you. He says, just do this, take care of the flat tire. I'll make sure that everything else runs well in your life. That's really what he says. And he is so adamant about this that he actually throws out a challenge that he makes no place else in the entire Bible. He says, try this, put me to the test. He says, just try this, do it. Put me to the test. It's almost like he's saying, I dare you. And what happens is when we choose to do this and we go ahead and try him on it, then in essence, God's Spirit begins to work in our lives. When we say, okay, God, we're going to fix this flat, we're going to try it, we're going to trust you, God's Spirit begins to work in our lives and things begin to happen you wouldn't have dreamed it before. And again, it's not to make us rich. He doesn't say that. In essence, what he says in here, in the passage, he says, look, your crops, I'll make sure the bugs don't get them, that they just do what they're supposed to do. He says, I'll make sure the grapes stay on the vine long enough so that they'll actually be able to have a great harvest. And so in essence, what he says to us is, you fix the flat, I'll make sure the paint job stays good. You fix the flat, I'll make sure the engine runs longer than it should. I'll make sure the brake pads don't go out prematurely. I'll just make sure, I'll take care of the other things, God is saying. And you just try me on this one. And again, it's not even about money. It's about putting God first. Because God says, look, you've got 10 of these. And he says, bring me the first one. He says, the other 9, you take it and you do whatever you want. He says, as a matter of fact, I'll bless these. So more will happen with these than you could ever imagine if you bring me this one. And so it's not even about money. It's just, do I trust God? Now, as a church, we believe in this so strongly that we actually have a thing we call the 90-day tithing challenge. And a lot of you did this last September. And it's where you make a commitment to say, okay, I'm going to test God on this one. I'm going to try it for 90 days. And I'm going to say, okay, God, my first 10%, it's going to you, and I'm going to trust you to take care of me. And we're going to do this for 90 days. And at the end of 90 days, for us as a church, we say, look, you do this. You sign up online, go to LCBC Church, you sign up, you do this. And at the end of the 90 days, if you'd say, you know what, God didn't come through, he did not take care of me, then we'll say, no questions asked, we'll just refund whatever you've given, not a problem. And so, again, it's just real simple to say, I'm going to do this for 90 days, and let's just see what God does. And so last September, when we did this, 764 households. So that's households, probably involves close to 3,000 people. 3,000 people, 764 households said, okay, we're going to take officially the 90-day challenge. Lots and lots of you said we're doing it, but we just haven't gone online. We're just kind of doing it on our own. But at least 3,000 of you. So far, only 7. 7 have come back and said, you know what, it's just not working. No questions asked. They receive a refund. And if it's in your mind, you say, I know what you're doing, David. You're just trying to get money for LCBC. I'd say, you know what, then give it to another church. Give it to another church. It's not about us. This is all about flat tires in our lives, your life. And God's saying, if you want everything else to run well, get this one figured out. Make me number one. Show me that I'm number one. Now, because so many people have been doing the 90-day challenge, we've gotten hundreds of stories of how God has been kind of taking care of people. That whole part about God says, I'll take care of you. I'll make sure that I take care of you is actually just kind of a real cool thing. And so all these different stories of how God has been taking care of people. And I don't have any stories about somebody saying, you know what, now we have boats and airplanes we never had before. It's not about that. It's just saying now we're getting through life and we're not worried about the money. God's taking care of it. So I just want to read you a couple of the emails that we received. This one was done on a Friday, and the person made a commitment on Sunday to say they're going to do the 90-day challenge. And it's by a gal. She says, God has already done it. Wow, I'm so humbled and amazed. Last Sunday in the gathering, I purposed to immediately start giving to God 10% of the income that he's blessed me with. I grew up in a pastor's home and have known since childhood what God is asking in regard to tithing. Here I am at 35 years old, finally surrendering. So saying, I've known this for a long time, just never actually done it. I made the changes to my budget on Monday morning, set my tithe aside for the next Sunday. I didn't think that much more about it until Wednesday morning at work. I was informed that I was receiving a cash award for $500 from my employer. I just sat at my desk and wept at the reality of God's goodness and faithfulness. To make this experience even more amazing, I found out that the award was processed last Sunday, the very day that I decided to trust God with this area of my life. He had his blessing ready and waiting for me, literally the moment I surrendered. What a mighty God we serve. This one is actually from 20 days into the challenge. It's from a couple, and the wife is writing. She says, my husband and I make a decent living, but have just bought a house 5 months ago. There isn't a lot of extra money after the bills are paid. But when David talked about tithing in the 90-day challenge, we discussed it, decided it was something we wanted to do, and we also knew it was something that God wanted us to do. We give to the church on a regular basis, but hadn't been tithing. I remember hearing David say if we gave 10% back to God, he would bless us in ways we couldn't imagine. I believe that, but I really didn't think anything extraordinary would happen to us during those 90 days. Boy, was I wrong. First payday, after signing up for the challenge, we wrote a $200 check, 10% of our paychecks, put it in the basket on Saturday evening. It feels good. It feels right, she says. 2 days later, there's a check that comes in the mail for $48.23. It's from her flexible spending account at work. It's a reimbursement for prescriptions I had purchased weeks before and had forgotten was coming. And we thought nothing of it. 2 weeks later, another $200 goes into the basket. We still feel good, but it's a little tougher to write that second check. That week in the mail, we received a check from our mortgage company for $255.26 for a surplus in our new escrow account. We both looked at each other and said, thank you, God, starting to realize that these two pieces of mail were not a coincidence. 2 more weeks pass by, and we give back another $200. Again, it's a sacrifice, but it feels like the right thing to do, so we do it. The very next day, I happened to attend designer handbag bingo. This is the key to the whole thing. It's go to bingo. It's kind of the key. This is the key. My dad had purchased a ticket for me to enjoy an afternoon of bingo with my sister, a bunch of friends, and about 175 other ladies trying to win fancy purses. It's a lot of fun, and it's for a good cause, benefiting the local community center. 4 hours of bingo passed without me winning anything. The very last event of the afternoon is a 50-50 drawing. In case you don't know, a 50-50 drawing is where the charity keeps half the money, one winner goes home with the other half. Well, you won't be surprised to hear that I won. What you might be surprised to learn is how much I won, $608, almost exactly the amount that we had tithed over the past 6 weeks. If you're keeping track, you'll realize that in the first 6 weeks of the tithing challenge, my husband and I gave $600 back to God and received over $900, most of it completely unexpected. If we ever needed a sign that we were doing God's will, this was it. We realized that something of this magnitude may never happen again and that we're not under any delusions that these kind of financial windfalls will continue, but we have seen firsthand the power of God and we are hooked. Yay, God. One other that I'll read you, and I could keep reading all day of just different stories. This one is kind of fun because it's actually from a guy, and it just kind of shows how God knows what we want. God knows our desires, knows how to take care of us. He says, let me start off by saying that I've always wanted a remote control helicopter. Now, I never revealed that desire to anyone, not even my wife. I've often window shopped online, thought maybe someday, but it's certainly not something that fit into our budget. To be honest, I haven't even thought about it for a while. So my wife and I decided to try the 90-day tithing challenge. We did the automatic biweekly plan so that we wouldn't forget and it would be the first fruits. This way we could be sure our tithing was consistent. I'm a computer programmer by trade, and I was supposed to attend a vendor conference October 22nd through the 24th in Nashville, Tennessee, but decided to stay home because our second daughter was due to be born around that time. When my coworkers returned from the conference, they had a surprise for me. Apparently, there was a 2014 .com's Community Awards ceremony this year, and because I was one of the top 3 community contributors on their coding forums, I had been given an award. A brand new DJ Phantom drone, a remote control helicopter, and an attachable in-flight video camera, $500 to $600 retail value. He just says, we serve an amazing God who knows us better than we realize. Thank you, God. Just where God says, I'll take care of you. I'll even give you the desires of your heart. And then he kind of finishes, and again, this was back in October, he wrote this. He says, no, I haven't flown it yet. God gave us another gift on October 27th, a beautiful baby girl. And again, there are dozens, hundreds that I could read to you, and it's all about saying, okay, things aren't necessarily going well right now. I could change the paint. I could buy a new sound system, but until I fix the tire, nothing's gonna be different. And God says, when it comes to our money, you can restructure it however you want. You can get whatever job you want. You can do anything else you want, but until you get this one right, it's gonna be out of whack. He says, put me first, everything else falls into order. Now, if you're interested, then in the atriums, at the info desk of all the atriums on our campuses, we've got a book that would give you. It's called The Generosity Ladder. It's free. It's just a way of saying, hey, here's the way that this even works in more detail. Bottom line, it's just God saying, I will take care of you. I will take care of you if you make me number one. One more story I want you to hear. It's from a gal named Pam. Pam attends the Lancaster City campus, and Pam, I think if she were honest and were talking to us, then she'd say her car, she was running on 4 flats, not just one. And things were pretty bleak, and she says, you know what do I have to lose? And so she signed up for the 90-day challenge. And again, God knows the desires of our hearts. God knows how to take care of us better than we even possibly know. And so kind of a cool story. Listen to Pam's story.
When the 90-day challenge came, I was at the point where I was so desperate that I figured it wouldn't matter if I, gave my first tenth to the Lord, because whether I did or whether I didn't, I wasn't going to be able to meet my financial obligations. I have no choice but to trust you, and so I'm going to do that, no matter how difficult it may seem. I felt really stuck, like between a rock and a hard place, just not being able to stay where I was, but not being able to go anywhere else.
She really needed to get out of the rental that she was in. One of the reasons for her seeking out housing is that her rent was so high that we could get her into a house for less than she would have had to pay in rent. There are certain people that come into your life that you just know that God sent them to you.
When your rent is due and your bills are due and you don't have the money, it's very difficult.
And she would go through all the paperwork, only to maybe get a little discouraged and see that that wasn't going to go through, and we'd go to another bank.
My possibilities of owning a home just seemed dead. Here we are, I didn't know where to turn or what to do, but I just kept tithing.
I don't think it's going to happen.
And so I just kept pursuing and just reading scripture. Every promise that I could draw from scripture, I told God, you said this, God, and I believe it, and I'm not, even though my circumstances don't seem like this is reality, I know that your word is true. I just kept believing what he said.
And then the glimmer of hope came in.
Yes, you are pre-approved for your mortgage.
And we were able to go start looking for houses. Houses don't come up every day that will meet the criteria. Well, God kind of laughed at me for my "O ye of little faith," and that night one new house came on.
It seemed possible, but it fell through.
Funny, the next night, another house popped up on the market, and we went there. She went ahead and put an offer in on.
Naomi spoke to the seller a little bit about my story, and they wanted to bless me by accepting my offer, which was lower than what they were asking.
She qualified for an extra subsidy on it. Her interest rate would only be 1%. And that meant an extra $250 a month to her. And she shared with me that she had taken the 90-day challenge. And up till that point, I don't think the two of us knew that we had attended the same church.
One blessing after the other, like the fact that the owners being Christians, and he offered me all of the furniture in the home and gave me an air conditioner and like just so many things. And at the beginning of this tithing challenge, like I did not want to tithe so that I could receive more blessings. It would be wonderful if I could just give to other people and not be so consumed with my own problems. So that's what this has meant for me. Like it is just like a conversation that I had with God, and he answered me, and it's so beautiful.